All right, everybody, we are back with section 6 of our criminology course, and today we're going to learn all about control theories. Now, control theories kind of take the opposite perspective than the theories we've learned before this, right? Under control theories, their assumption is that people are inherently criminal and they need some outside force to restrain that criminality, that deviance, right? Whereas all the other theories, or most of the other theories in this course, are kind of assuming that people are good and they need some push or some pull or some change or some thing to drive them into committing crime. Control theory sees it as the opposite. It's not crime we have to explain, it's conformity. It's not committing crime that needs to be explained, right? Now, we've talked a little bit about kind of sort of some of this in prior sections, right? So if you remember talking about Hobbes and the whole state of nature thing back in the first section, that was kind of the assumption that humans are inherently criminal, and we need that social contract thing to restrain us from just doing whatever we want. Freud with the whole id, ego, and superego thing from the section on psychology, that is more of a control theory. It's more about Freud talking about how it's our superego that restrains our instincts or our id from going out and committing crime. And then we talked very briefly about Toby's stakes in conformity, where the more people have to lose, the less likely they are to commit crime. So in other words, it's those benefits they have, a good job, a family, a house, a car, all those things that they don't want to lose, that controls them and prevents them from committing crime. So this isn't a completely different idea than some of the things we've been talking about. But the major control theories, remember, aren't trying to explain why people commit crime. They're trying to explain why people don't commit crime. Okay? And there were a couple early ones that are not super popular today because they were relatively simplistic and have been surpassed by larger, more famous, more well-defined control theories. But a couple of those early ones, there's this Nye back in the 50s. He pointed out that there's a process of social control, right? And his big kind of contribution was to cut those down into 3 different kinds of controls, 3 different ways in which society or some external or even internal force prevents us from committing the crime that we by nature want to commit, right? There's direct controls, which are things like parents and teachers and law enforcement that will punish us if we do that bad thing. There's indirect controls, which is more like, the disappointment and shame of those we care about, our family, our friends, our coworkers. The idea of disappointing them or angering them or bringing shame to them is an indirect control. And then there's internal controls, which is just your sense of moral belief, your conscience, your that piece of you that says don't do that. The Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder saying, oh, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't do all those bad things, right? Now, this is relatively similar to this guy Reckless just a couple years later, and yes, Reckless is their real name. It's one of the coolest last names I've ever seen, as a complete side note. But so back in the early 60s, Reckless kind of expanded a little bit on this and talked about outer containment, inner containment, and then pushes and pulls, right? So outer containment is the external forces that contain us, prevent us from going out and committing crime. It's the police, it's the getting in trouble with your parents, it's the punishment that other people or other organizations or other factors will bring to you if you act on these desires that we all have. And then inner containment, which is, our own internal sense of morality and belief. I'm not going to do that because it's wrong, and I have been socialized with these values that stealing is wrong, so I am not going to go out and steal and do that wrong thing because that's bad, right? That's inner containment. But he also added in, that's very similar to the nigh thing from the last slide. But he also added in the pushes and pulls driving people towards criminal behavior, right? And there's both inner and outer pushes and pulls. So to reckless, this whole process and kind of life is a series of containments, both outer and inner, and then pushes and pulls, both outer and inner. And which one is more powerful? The containment forces that prevent us from committing crime, or the pushes that are driving us towards committing crime, right? Now, this is one of my favorites, and different textbooks and different criminology courses will put this section in different sections. They'll put Sykes and Matza and the techniques of neutralization, sometimes in control theory, sometimes in a section all their own, sometimes wherever routine activities theory is. I chose to put them in control theory. And this techniques of neutralization, it's different than any of the other theories of crime. And it's weirdly not a theory of criminality. It's more of some criminologists don't even consider it technically a theory of criminality, okay? But what Sykes and Matza said, and they're, I think, the late 50s, early 60s, something like that, but that kind of sort of time period. The techniques of neutralization are Sykes and Matza's way of saying the vast majority of people were law-abiding, right? But in certain situations, in certain instances, for certain kinds of crime, we are able to simultaneously consider ourselves good people who would never commit crimes, except for this, right? So we're able to neutralize that socialization and social control of, committing crime is wrong, and we'll find some reason to justify why our behavior in this instance is okay, right? So we can maintain this positive self-image of a law-abiding, normal person. I'm a good person. I abide by the law. I would never murder somebody or commit any of those other really bad crimes. But in this particular case, it's okay because, right? So it's justifying the occasional diversion into activities that are technically illegal or at least deviant, right? And when they first wrote out these techniques of neutralization, they had 5 kind of different common subtypes, right? 5 different ways in which people could justify to themselves why their actions in this situation are okay, despite the fact that they're not criminals and would normally abide by the law, etc., etc. Since this initial one, there have been other ones introduced, proposed, some of them just for general situations like this, some of them for very specific situations. In my course on cybercrime, I talk about 1 or 2 of these additional techniques of neutralization that are specifically introduced to explain and justify certain cyber criminal actions, right? But these are the original 5, and they kind of apply to crime in general, right? So first, there's denial of responsibility, right? In other words, it wasn't my fault. Somebody else there was some outside influence that made me do it, right? It wasn't, normally I would never shoplift, but my whole group of friends was daring me to and laughing at me because I didn't want to. And so finally I just went out and did it, but it's not my fault. It's their fault for pushing me into it. right? That's denial of responsibility. Then there's denial of injury, right? Yes, I did it, but there was really no harm caused, right? Sure, I stole from this, I stole something from Walmart, but Walmart makes billions and billions of dollars a year. They're not going to notice one $10 product missing off their shelves. There's no harm there. I'm not hurting anybody. That's denial of injury, right? So normally I would never commit a crime, but in this case it's fine because I'm not hurting anybody. There's no there's no injury to be caused here, right? Um, Doing drugs often justified via denial of injury. I'm only doing things to myself. I'm not injuring anybody else. Thus, yes, I'm committing a crime by doing these drugs, but it's okay, and I'm not a criminal because, right? Third one there is denial of the victim, which is just to say it's the victim's fault I did it, right? Sure, I punched him in the face, but he insulted my mother, so it's okay that I assaulted him, right? Or, yeah, sure, I shot those two people, but I caught my wife in bed with another man, so I grabbed a gun and shot them both, right? So it's their fault I committed this crime against them, right? Often this one gets confused with denial of responsibility, but the denial of the victim is specifically the victim made me do it. Denial of responsibility is specifically this outside force that isn't the victim made me do it, right? The fourth one there is condemning the condemners, right? So, if your parents say, "Oh, I can't believe we caught you smoking marijuana." Condemning the condemners would be kind of trying to turn it back on them and say like, "Oh, well, you smoked marijuana when you were my age." Or, yeah, sure, I might have smoked some marijuana, but you get drunk 7 nights a week, right? Who are you to come after me for or punish me or judge me for doing this thing that's nowhere near as bad as what you do, right? So it's kind of deflecting responsibility, deflecting any sort of blame for your actions by saying that the people pointing out that your actions are wrong also do wrong things. Okay? And then finally, there's the appeal to higher loyalties. And this is where we say, yes, this is technically illegal. This thing that I'm doing would normally be wrong and is against the law, but I am following the commands of something or someone that I respect more than the law, right? So this is often used in things like religious terrorism, right? Normally, I would never commit any kind of crime. Normally, I would never murder somebody, but God told me to, and so this, my religion teaches me that I need to go out and do this because my God is more important than the law, and thus it's okay for me to ignore the law in this situation, right? It can also be used with gangs, right? Whether it's a motorcycle gang or a street gang or the mafia or whatever. And that is, I'm a good person. Normally I'm a law-abiding person, but this gang, this group that I belong to tells me I need to do this thing. So it's justifiable because they need me to do it, if that makes sense, right? So in all 5 of these cases, the process here is that somebody who is otherwise considers themselves a good person can commit a crime but justify it to themselves by saying, yes, what I am doing or did is technically a crime, but it's okay because, right? So in that way, we can kind of maintain our positive self-image, not consider ourselves a bad person or a criminal, while still going out and committing crimes, right? I mean, think about you. You probably do these things all the time, right? I mean, can anybody really tell me that they have never violated the speed limit, driven too fast, right? cut the tag off of a mattress. We all do these little things sometimes, and we say, oh, yes, okay, technically that's against the law, but it's okay because, right? That's the techniques of neutralization. And it's, to me at least, one of the more fascinating kind of subjects within this giant field of criminology. I find it just incredibly interesting. And again, these 5 have since been kind of expanded upon by other researchers. They've added different kinds of methods by which this process happens. Some specific to certain crimes like cybercrime. Some more broad like these 5 are. But all really interesting. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and take a break. Thank you so much for watching.